Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and there is sort of a theme running through today's program. We're trying to wind through the segments with this theme. It just occurred to me this morning that really everything that we are talking about today, and all of our guests are talking about the issue of character, both individual and collective. We're talking about the family. We're talking about our children, in particular our girls, and the Girl Scouts used to help us with that. Now it's the American Heritage Girls. We will be talking with their founder and leader in just a moment. And then we'll be talking about the home, about actually there's a theology of the home. And there's a spiritual art of homemaking. It really doesn't have as much to do with how beautiful your home is, except for sort of the character of your home. We will talk with Noelle Mering about that. Then in the military, Mike Berry from First Liberty Institute will join us. This is Military Appreciation Month, and we will talk about the challenges to religious liberty in the military. We'll continue with Elaine Donnelly from the Center for Military Readiness to talk about a challenge to the all-male draft registration, which is actually in court. The Supreme Court has to decide whether to take a case. And we'll talk about the transgender agenda in the military. All of that we'll try to shovel in 2 hours. We will take your calls also a little bit later in the program. First, I do want to introduce my first guest, who I've actually known for over 25 years. It's been 25 years that Patti Garibay has been leading American Heritage Girls. She actually founded it. She's been at the forefront of countering the culture by leading girls and women to creating lives of integrity. She's founder. She's now, her title is executive director. This is a robust national Christ-centered leadership and character development program called American Heritage Girls. It's in every state in the nation. We'll ask Patti how many girls are involved now, but it's been a wonderful growth since the Girl Scouts actually turned its back on God and moral principles. Patti, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Penn. It's good to hear your voice again.
It's good to hear yours, and I actually met you before you even started American Heritage Girls. I know that you were thinking about it, and I was so pleased to see that you actually wrote a book, and I've got the book in front of me. I actually read it cover to cover because I know you, and I wanted to know about you and what drove you to start this wonderfully successful organization. The book is Why Curse the Darkness When You Can Light a Candle. And Patti, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about the asterisk that the Girl Scouts placed on God?
Yeah, it seems so small and so minor, but yet it was so life-changing for me as a Girl Scout volunteer for 13 years, and then, of course, a Girl Scout as a young lady. And I love that organization so much and was able to bring ministry into it as well. But in 1993, when the Girl Scouts decided that they would no longer mandate an oath to God, a matter of fact, put an asterisk by the Lord's name, the rest is pretty much history, because when you get rid of God, you then get rid of his truth and his teaching and his way of life. And my question was, how could a character development program for girls that had really stood firm for over 100 years suddenly decide it's time to remove this very important philosophical pinnacle of the foundress, Julia Gordon-Low, had been placed in that Girl Scout promise, and now say it's no longer necessary. And as a matter of fact, we're open to all people, including atheists. So this was detrimental to the organization, and obviously it really affected me, and it made me pause and say, how can I continue serving with this organization when they no longer stand for what I stand for?
I think one thing I learned from this book was that this was not a quick decision. As a matter of fact, the tenacity and really, I think, the attention to detail with which you have founded and created American Heritage Girls was also there when you were trying to actually bring some of these problems to light and to make changes with other leaders inside the Girl Scouts. And even back then, we began to hear of the influence of homosexual volunteers and staff and the strong advocacy of the lesbian lifestyle in the Scouts back in the early 90s, didn't we?
Yes, and even as I learned more about it, I found that even back in the 70s, their embracing of the National Organization for Women, of course, their promotion of the ERA amendment to pass. Now, this is all very historical,
Yes.
isn't it, Penna? But really, Betty Friedan served on the national board of the Girl Scouts. Now, I didn't, I was at the level where I was at the troop level. I wasn't sure who served on the national board. Little did I know the influence that people like this would have on this organization. So absolutely, it was entrenched. However, we did, our small little band, our little remnant of parents that cared about this issue, we created a small group called CRY, Caring Responsibly for Our Youth, thinking certainly the Girl Scouts just misunderstood where America was, and that with just a little bit of common sense, they'd shake themselves to their senses. They would stop this Girl Scout promise from changing, and they would come back to their senses. But, that snowball had gone down the proverbial hill way too fast, and it was already gaining great momentum.
I think when I look at it now and I see the sexual revolution and then the agenda for just changing sexual morality and even the truth about gender identity and all of that, you see that there was an agenda. You really didn't, you couldn't have changed the Girl Scouts, but tell us, kind of what your epiphany was to finally leave and create American Heritage Girls.
Yeah, for us, it was, we thought we would follow the democratic process, quote unquote, that the Girl Scouts had really touted as the way that they operated the organization. And so we thought, well, let's put a Christian person on this board of directors that would possibly help them to see their, the error of their ways. And what really struck me, and I talk about this in the book, where this person was brought up for nomination from the floor, which was totally following their democratic process and so forth. And what happened was they announced that after tallying the ballots, they realized that there was absolutely no one there that had voted for this candidate. And I knew for sure that I had voted for that candidate, and so did many others. And so there was a gasp. And that's when I realized that when they lied in front of an entire auditorium of delegates, that there was no longer a way that I could ever represent the Girl Scouts USA, whether at a local level or at a national level. And it was time for me to pull my third daughter out of the program that I had loved so long. And it became very obvious that there was more for me to do. I'm not one to easily retreat, but I'm also not one to jump right in. I had 4 kids, my husband an MBA program, busy as could be, but yet I felt the calling for the Lord to bring me into where he felt I needed to be, and that was to start American Heritage Girls.
Well, after the break, we are going to talk about where American Heritage Girls is, how people can get involved, and just some of the things that you're passionate about right now in ministering to girls through this organization. But I did enjoy in the book, Patti, and we're coming right up on a break, so you won't be able to respond, but to see how God used your dad having a debilitating MS over many years of your childhood and early adulthood. And just his courage was really an inspiration for you. And I think God used that to give you the ability to do something that was very hard and has become very important. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Critical race theory is coming to a school district near you. First, it was being promoted through a bill in Congress. Now it looks like it will be funded through President Biden's Department of Education. Critical race theory actually rests upon a Marxist foundation, but has a significant difference. Karl Marx focused on class conflict between capitalists and workers. This newer form of Marxism substituted race for class and sought a coalition of the dispossessed based upon racial and ethnic categories. Stanley Kurtz has been warning that the Civics Secures Democracy Act would be used by activists and educators to promote critical race theory. Now the Department of Education proposed a regulation that directs grant money to prioritize applications that support the development of culturally responsive teaching and learning. And I might mention that phrases like equity and culturally responsive are key buzzwords for critical race theory. Christopher Rufo has been documenting how critical race theory is already arriving in the schools. A California elementary school forced first graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. A middle school in Missouri forced teachers to locate themselves on an oppression matrix based upon the idea that white Christian males were members of an oppressor class. Although he is just one investigative journalist, he has already put together a database of more than 1,000 stories already. You know, last year, President Trump issued an executive order banning critical race theory training in the federal government. President Biden rescinded that order on his first day and now appears to be promoting it in schools across the country. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Patti Garibay. She is founder and executive director of American Heritage Girls. And I am going to open the phones, 800-351-1212, for specific questions about American Heritage Girls. I really, that's the only topic I want to have in the questions, just questions for Patti, in case you just need to know something, want some information about it. But I am going to ask you, Patti, to just describe the organization, give us an overview. And first, I want to know about the growth. How many girls are involved as of now, and how many states? I understand you're in every state.
Correct. We're in all 50 states and 15 international countries, over 50,000 members. And this, of course, is a work of the Lord.
Yes.
Those are his kind of numbers, not my kind of numbers. COVID has put a bump in our membership numbers this year, but we are so excited about the interest and the excitement of coming back now that things are opening up and to begin again this transforming ministry for girls ages 5 to 18.
When you say transforming, I know that you do try to go to the heart and you try to give the girls spiritual principles for dealing with the problems of life. And in a minute, we're going to talk about how you did that with the COVID pandemic. But first of all, I want you to just kind of, I am impressed with how robust the program is. And I actually got to help a girl with one of her, for about, several weeks, maybe even a couple of months. She asked me to work on, I guess you call it a badge or something similar to that. This was like 10 years ago. And it was such an eye-opener for me, since I knew you, to see how really well thought out all of this is and how much the girls enjoy it.
Absolutely. I think part of the secret sauce is what we call the multi-level programming, which allows a girl 5 to 18 to be in the same troop. They're broken up into age groups, but the younger girl can look up to the older girl. The older girl can teach her skills to the younger girl. And so this beautiful, it's almost like a Titus II kind of feel, where the older girls really are able to minister and disciple the younger girls too, not just in their faith, but also in these kind of everyday life skills that we need just to manage our world. Transforming is because I use that word because it truly is eternally impactful. I think COVID's brought us somewhere here, Penna, where we start to realize, well, did I really need to do all the busy things that I did with my kids? Which activities are going to be truly eternally impactful. And parents are sort of at that juncture right now. They need tools in their tool belt. They want to make sure that they have an impact kind of activities rather than taking up time kind of activities. And we're seeing this really great influx of interest because it is a time such as this, our Esther moment, that when the world is so dark, our candles can, burn even brighter.
Yes, and your candle burned bright when you started this organization, but I think you're right. I think it's kind of it's just dropped some scales from our eyes, and especially in the area of raising your children, it's caused people to rethink a lot of things. And so I want you to tell people how they can get involved, again, the ages, and just you can go to pointofview.net and link through to the website of American Heritage Girls. But just give people just a couple of steps for getting involved if they are interested.
Right. There's many ways that you can get involved. First of all, praying for this ministry is really vital. It is the Lord's ministry, and prayer around it is always so appreciated. Donating, it costs money to run a ministry, right? Especially one of this size. And if that's where you're at and you're able to do that, would be great. If you've got time where you feel like I want a purpose in my life, I want to be making a difference, and this next generation needs my help, consider volunteering with American Heritage Girls. There's bound to be a troop in your area, and if there's not, we charter these troops through churches who want to expand their church ministry. They want to expand their membership. They want to minister to families. That's what American Heritage Girls is all about. It goes hand in hand with the church. It espouses their teaching. Unlike what I was experiencing with the Girl Scouts, we are aligned with the church. We believe in truth. We believe in the importance of a girl's identity as a biological girl in a feminine role. We are just sort of, everything old is new again. I mean, when I'm looking most recently at the Girl Scout site and I'm seeing them talk about who can join Girl Scouts, and they said you can join if you're cisgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary, transgender. I'm like, what? These girls need to know who they are and whose they are, and they can only do that through their identity in Christ.
Now, I know that it's fun because I've known girls that have been involved, and there's the camping. I mean, that doesn't go away with American Heritage Girls, does it?
Absolutely not. So many people see the face of God by their time that they spend with him in his beautiful creation. And so we absolutely love that. Girls also learn how to be independent, to be away from mom and dad for a while, to be able to learn who they are again, and to be with loving adult spirit-filled mentors and like-minded girls that really are there cheering them on. I mean, nothing's cooler, Penna, than seeing a girl for the first time climb a rock wall, or in the case of the ability to really climb a wall, in the mountains, just cheer them on to reach that point, that pinnacle that they have set their eye on. And that's what American Heritage Girls is. It allows girls, to fail forward, to be able to really spread their wings and learn about potentially their vocation, what the Lord is calling them to do with the rest of their life. And a lot of them are finding the nuggets that began what their pursuit for the rest of their life is in American Heritage Girls, because it's so experiential.
All right. So you also, you look to sort of the moments that the culture is in, and you try to address those as they affect girls. And I think one, since we have just gone through this year plus of a pandemic, and, it's just, it's rocked the culture and the society. And, I have been reading lately about really how the effect this has had on kids, especially, say, middle school, high school kids. I mean, when you think about the lack of a social life, that's really hard for kids. Their friends are very important at that time. So what have you done, and how are you helping girls navigate this?
It is so true. The difficulty, currently, this is actually in 2018, there's a study, the Mental Health Institute ran a study on adolescents, and they were saying that 1 out of 3 adolescents have a diagnosed mental illness, meaning that they're stressed out, they have anxiety, They're diagnosed. 1 out of 3. Can you imagine how many are undiagnosed? And that is pre-COVID. So we know that mental health is at a very, very low point in this country and in this world. And it is so important that we deal with that. We don't just brush it under the cover, so to speak. Fear and anxiety are very top notch subject matters for kids. Today, with COVID, there's unbelievable fear. I mean, we found it in 9/11. I remember going through that time with the youth, and as I was working with how fearful they were that when would the next terrorist attack. Well, they're worried about when is the next pandemic going to occur. What is that going to mean for me? They have lots of sleepless nights. We try to encourage the girls to understand through a new subgroup that we call Raising Godly Girls. This is a blog that we've created, Penna. It is a toolbox for parents. We created it in honor of our 25th birthday. We thought the Lord has been so good to us. How can we bless the nation rather than just our members? And so when you go to raisinggodlygirls.org or you go to the American Heritage Girls website, you can get a free download of a booklet that's entitled How to Help Your Daughter Navigate Fear and Anxiety. It will give you not only calls to action and what you can do in your own home, but also scriptural references that affirm and reaffirm what God's promises are to us around these issues. And I really feel this is such an important thing that we talk about it, we tackle it, and we intentionally raise up a godly girl.
It's very intentional. Well, I promised I'd take calls, but we don't have the time before the end of this interview. One caller, though, Shelby from Georgia, asked, are you planning on doing anything like this for older women? And Patti, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the answer is older women can be involved in American Heritage Girls. They would have their own ministry, and you would teach them how, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And a matter of fact, the camaraderie, the family that's developed with the older women, I often say this is a ladies' ministry as well as a girls' ministry. So she's right on to something right there. She will be fed spiritually and grow that way too.
Patti, thank you so much. I wish we had an hour actually today because we could go into the nuts and bolts. But I hope that, we had a few years where I actually didn't talk to you on radio, but I think we need to have a few years ahead where we do, because there are so many issues that affect girls that you're dealing with. Thank you so much for just creating this organization. You put your life into it. And thank you for joining me today for Point of View. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Penna. God bless you and your listeners.
That's Patti Garibay, American Heritage Girls. You can go to pointofview.net and click through and find out a lot more. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. We are going to talk in the next couple of segments about homemaking. It's not what you think, though, because there once was a discipline taught in high school. You can even major in it in college, and it was home economics, the principles of a well-run home. And I sometimes lament the absence of those courses and that major that you could even take. I admire those skills. I lack some of them. But we are going to address homemaking in a different way. We're going to address the homemaker. How is she developed in her abilities to do this important job? And really, what is the spiritual art of homemaking? And it comes from a beautiful book called The Theology of Home II, The Spiritual Art of Homemaking, by Carrie Gress and Noelle Mering. Noelle is my guest, and she writes regularly on the topics of politics, culture, and religion. She's got a background in philosophy as well as home design. What a wonderful combination. She's an editor of theologyofhome.com. She lives in Southern California. Well, you'll just see, because this book is so beautiful. There's a picture of it at pointofview.net along with Noelle's picture. And the photography in the book is so beautiful, but it draws you into the copy and the wonderful truths in the book. And Noelle, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
The book concentrates on the homemaker, as I said, and you've said that the homemaker provides a connective tissue. Could you explain that concept more?
Sure. Well, I think one of the ideas for the book in general is that there is this wonderful combination of our life in the material world and also our lives in the spiritual world. And that really the goal of the Christian is to, use the material world to connect us more closely to God. But it can easily veer into something that just is materialism for its own sake or self-glorifying. And so I think what the role of the homemaker is to provide a connective tissue between these two worlds, so that we are, as we care for our children, or as we care, for our husbands, as we care for our home, that we really aren't just doing something mundane. We're not just washing a dish. We're not just making a bed. We're not just cooking a meal. But rather, we're actually doing these things out of love in order to create a fabric of home life that is, nurturing and providing stability, providing safety, providing care, and also helping all of us to facilitate our understanding of who God is and how much He loves us through the love that we're communicating to one another.
I want to give you the opportunity to ask Noelle a question, ladies and gentlemen. So the number is 800-351-1212. But Noelle, it was interesting, as I had already spent a lot of time with your book over the weekend. This morning, in the newspaper, I saw a piece of news that really relates. U.S. births dropped to the lowest since 1979, and the birth rate has been going down, down, down. It's now at 1.64 children per woman, and that's getting us in unreplaceable territory, and our population has been decreasing. And so, Noelle, when you look at this, and I go back to the 60s when the feminists like Betty Friedan were trying to tap into sort of a discontent with homemaking, because it was becoming easier through all the appliances and technology we had, but it was beginning to be boring. And so this discontent was being fostered with actually being a mother and a wife. And, we're seeing that overflow even into modern culture, aren't we?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I have a new book coming out this month about the woke culture. It's called Awake, Not Woke. But I really dive into these sort of ideas. I think we don't realize how much we've been propagandized as women and as men, and with a goal to sort of disentangle us from our families and to make us feel like we're these independent automatons who can just go out in the world without needing other people, without needing to care for other people or needing their care. And that's really opposite of the human experience. When we enter into the world as a baby, when we become mothers, we are vulnerable. We need, how much do I need my husband when I'm postpartum just to help? And, we all need each other. And the family unit is the community that God set up to facilitate those relationships and to provide for every person in the human family. But we've been giving this message that our goal is not love ultimately, but it's actually power. And that's what Betty Friedan and all these feminists, I think, were really trying to communicate. And it's the same message we get now. I mean, and it seems innocuous in so many ways. You have T-shirts for girls, at stores that say girl power, and all these modeling of how getting girls in STEM, getting girls in professional fields. There's nothing wrong with women joining the professional fields. There's nothing wrong with encouraging girls in sciences. These are good things. But I think taken all together, what we're seeing is that these things are to be preferred and are more noble than the very basic and simple life of love that is contained in family life. And that's when it becomes disordered, when it becomes placed above something else, and for the sake of making the life of the homemaker seem silly or trite or just for someone who is of lower intelligence. These things that's a real lie. And I think that our human experience points us to the truth, right? When we get married, we fall in love, we get married, we have a child. We want to have those relationships flourish. And how do we help them to flourish? And that's really what we're trying to dive into in Theology of Home, is that these are places where women can flourish and find true, deep happiness. But we have to undo all of these messages that we've been tangled up in.
Well, we do. And I think one thing that helps do that or undo it in your book is the stories of women themselves, which are then, you explain some of these truths. And in the interest of time, I just want to move to one that was nearer the center of this book, and that is how important it is. And I'm a grandmother now, so I have the view of having raised my children and now watching my grandchildren be raised and trying to be involved in that as an advisor and grandmother. But the importance of making your home a place where people can belong. And I'm going to quote the book. There is a sort of insight into the value of another human being that lies at the core of making a home. And you say mothers are given a window into the true beauty and irreplaceability of a human being, a window into how God sees us. And you say that, mothers get eyes to see our loved ones with optimism and hope, with belief they are capable of great things, and that somehow our seeing them that way helps them see the potential in themselves. And as a grandmother, and is pretty much, working part-time, but pretty much focused on my home all during the child-rearing years, I see the importance of that and how for many women, that is almost impossible to do without being a full-time mother. What do you say to that?
Oh, yeah, that's actually I really loved that section of the book, that seeing the potential. And I see that women really have the capacity to do that. It's a sort of motherly, womanly love that is an expression of an aspect of God's love, the way God loves us. And I think I wrote in that section about how there's an old funny saying, "A face only a mother can love," and it's supposed to be funny, about an unattractive baby or something. But I think it actually is. People think of it means, oh, well, women see their children in a delusionary way. But actually, I think it's the opposite. I think it's what as you were saying, that we have an insight into the real beauty of a human being that is, beyond that accounts for their physical makeup, but also speaks to something spiritual and the reality of their soul. And I think for children to grow up feeling that sense, it starts as a feeling. You just feel you're beloved. Your mother showers you with love. And as you say, that's much easier to communicate when you're really there. All this, you're really spending day in and day out with that child. But then eventually it becomes not just a feeling, but a conviction where you realize, oh, I am irreplaceable. And that whispers to you of the way that your soul is seen by God. And it's quite powerful. And I think if children don't have that, they might wind up, venturing out into the world looking for it in ways that aren't quite appropriate, or because they're desperate for that sense that they are their life means something. And if it wasn't communicated through their mother, then it's something that they're going to need fulfilled in some way. So yeah, I think it's vital work, and as you say, it's quite difficult to do unless you're really spending day in and day out and understanding that time is valuable, and that that time you're putting into it, this is not wasted time. That it's a hidden part of life, being at home with our children, but immeasurable in its value. And I think we need to remember that.
You know, I think some people look at it as a privilege that's unattainable because of, for instance, financial needs and pursuits. But there's a different way of looking at it, and sometimes that helps you to see all the other surrounding peripheral issues in a different way. So, you know, I think if you're looking at this saying this is just totally impractical to me, that I would even be able to put all my attention on my home, just look at it with open arms and trust in God. We're going to continue to talk about some of the whys, hows of and the theology of home with Noelle Mering. We're so grateful she's with us, and we'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Noelle Mering. She is author, actually co-author, of this beautiful book, Theology of Home II, The Spiritual Art of Homemaking. She's got a co-author and some beautiful photography done by the contributors to the book. And I think the pictures really draw you in, Noelle. But just the topics, you have a huge section on fruit, from fruit to power, which is sort of what you already talked about. But what is fruitfulness? How do you treat the concept of fruitfulness? In addition, of course, to the command to be fruitful and multiply, which is part of this. But what else?
Sure. Yeah, no, that was sort of a running theme throughout the book. And our photographer, Kim Bale, just have beautiful pictures of fruit and flowers and all sorts of things. And I think it's a great metaphor that, God's given us that, fruit and flowers are really beautiful aspects of nature, but they start in a hidden way, right? There's a soil, which soil is at the root of the word humility. Humility is from the Latin humus, which is a fascinating concept to dig into, that humility actually means dirt or soil.
Wow.
But that in some ways there's a receptivity of the woman to receive a seed planted. From God can plant seeds in our hearts of things that we want to bear fruit through. And even biologically, obviously, that's a metaphor. But then it's the seed is planted, it's hidden, but that hidden time is important work, and we even see it in Christ's life. His first 30 years were very hidden. His public life started later. And that was, I think, probably incredibly purposeful, to show this value, this hidden family life that he led before he became public. But for women, eventually something is it is nurtured. This planting process is watered, nurture, sun, all these elements that go into it. Eventually, you see the results of these things, and it's just a great metaphor, I think, for womanhood in general. That we're called to be fruitful by God. And I think that means pretty clearly biologically. It also means spiritually. I think there's a spiritual fruitfulness. There's women who are unable to bear children or perhaps never marry. And I don't think that their lives are less fruitful. I think that they're just called to a different sort of cooperation with the will of God. And they can be mentors, mothers to people at work. We are all made to be mothers in some capacity. And I think we've really lost that sense. So feminism has sort of introduced us into this idea that only men's virtues are virtuous and that the virtue of the woman is less. And I think that it winds up where we just start imitating what men are, and oftentimes what bad men are, not caring, loving men. So, I think that fruitfulness is an archaic word. It sort of feels strange to the modern tongue, but there's a really beautiful and simple metaphor there that we can learn from.
What about this sort of, you call it a fundamentalist caricature, and I think it is, of a concept of submission of a wife to a husband? Can you made that so clear to me. I believe that it's such a true concept and it's resonated in my life, but to explain it to someone who doesn't even really have faith is very hard. So just talk about this a little.
Extraordinarily hard. It's extraordinarily hard because I think there's been such a push to mock this idea. But I think one of the ways we can start thinking about it is, think about just submission in general. Why do we understand that to be a negative thing? Just besides all the movies we see, all these characters and media, but we see Christ was. He submitted his will, even though his will is perfectly united to his Father's. Still, there is this human dynamic where we see that he follows the Father, and he is constantly referencing his Father. And he models for us a servant leadership. He washes the feet of the disciples. This is not a leadership that's built around power. It is a leadership that is powerful, but because it's built around service and love. And it's an entirely different framework, and one that's hard for the modern mind to wrap its head around. But it really is. You don't have love without service and without self-sacrifice. And these things cheerfully and generously done, ideally. But I think there's certain things. In my own family, what we have found is that it's not as concrete or role based so much. So, I have heart rewired lamps in my ceiling. My husband is a fantastic chef, so he oftentimes will probably take on more of the load in cooking. And I think that there needs to be a lot of understanding that there is a structure of a submission, but it also is there's a lot of freedom within the roles. And I think that the character does a real disservice, because in a real loving family, it is a submission that is built around a total mutual care and self-sacrifice, so that it's not the husband's will in opposition to the wife's will. It's what is good for the family. And I think one of the things I've seen in my family is that men taking ownership of the spiritual life of the family has innumerable benefits, because if it's really the wife leading it, boys start to think of it as a womanly thing. It's girly. Religion is sentimental.
Yes.
It's too feminine. And when men lead it, religion takes on this character of it's something strong, it's something heroic. This is something, courageous. And women, of course, can embody that too. Courage in their faith, strength in their faith, obviously. But men carry with them, even in their bodies, this kind of iconography of authority. They're stronger, their voice is deeper, their shoulders are broader. And women carry in their bodies this kind of iconography of nurturing, of tenderness, of love. And these are both aspects of God, and these are both incredibly important, but they're different dynamics. And that's why I think, it just changes the character of the children's understanding of their faith if they see their father really owning it in this very specific way.
Oh, there are so many questions I have for you in so little time. But let me ask one about worry, because women, you said they're nurturers, and I think we have to say right now that there are just certain qualities that it's not always, but mostly women have them and men have others. But it can bleed over to, the other gender. Of course, they're trying to blur it all today, but leaving that aside, what about worry? Women seem to be professional worriers. You mentioned that it somehow gives a sense of control, and we overthink things, obsess. And maybe that's just a way of taking care of people. But where is God present in that, and what would be a better way?
Sure. Yeah. No, but I think it's such a big question and relevant to so many women, including myself. I think that worry is sort of, if they see worry, we compare that to contemplation. And, they seem similar, but they really are oriented in different ways. So worry is sort of, I'm going to spend mental energy trying to think about this thing, think about all the ways it could go wrong, think about all the dangers, and it's connected to some fear and anxiety. Whereas contemplation is taking that same problem, that same thing, but it's all looking at it through an act of surrender. That I want to trust here. I want to have trust in God, and that can take away my fear, and that can take away my anxiety. But I'm going to take it to my prayer life. So I'm still thinking about it, but I'm thinking about it for the sake of trust and surrender, rather than for the sake of, if I think about this hard enough, I can keep that bad thing from happening, which is, I think, what we oftentimes fall
into. We don't
into.
have that control.
So, oriented different ways.
Noelle, thank you so much for this beautiful book and for joining me today. I will say that you mentioned you have another book coming out about the woke culture, which I think is so important, especially as we see the demise and sort of the morphing of the family that the left is trying to make happen in our culture. I think that book will be very important. We'll have to have you back on that. But thank you so much for what you've done here and for joining me today on Point of View.
It was great to be with you. Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net. You'll see the book. You can get it, and I recommend you give it to people, moms and not moms, and dads and families, and get one for yourself. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic. I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me. In the interest of May being Military Appreciation Month, a little bit later in this hour, we are going to be joined by Elaine Donnelly from the Center for Military Readiness. And for most of that interview, we're going to talk about this effort to push for the, requirement for females to also register for the draft. There's actually a court case, and she and her organization and others are encouraging the Supreme Court not to take it because it's actually just about on its doorstep. And so we'll just talk about that a little bit later. But for now, I'm joined by Mike Berry. And Mike is General Counsel for First Liberty Institute. Many of you who listen to Point of View often have heard him as co-host in here in our studios, although it's been a while, and I miss that, Mike. But let me just tell folks, you've been at First Liberty since 2013. Before that, you served as in the military, in the U.S. Marines as an attorney for 7 years on active duty, even serving in Afghanistan, and also as an adjunct professor of law at the U.S. Naval Academy. First Liberty is blessed to have you, and so are we today, Mike. It's good to have you.
It's so great to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I mean, I didn't realize when I had Steve book you that this was Military Appreciation Month, and also that you've actually got one of First Liberty's great live stream programs that you have on Thursdays. I guess you're on tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. I will be a guest on First Liberty Live, so it'll be a chance for folks to hear about the cases and issues affecting religious liberty from the front lines of religious freedom cases.
Well, I do miss you having you in studio, but you're general counsel, and I know that you've got a wide array of duties there at First Liberty, but one thing that you do major in is any cases where religious liberty is attacked in the military, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's an area that's really a labor of love for me. I'm very passionate about defending our service members and our veterans when it comes to their constitutional rights. So, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different hats that I wear at First Liberty, but that's one that I sort of, have requested the right of first refusal for any case that involves the military.
Yeah, well, they're blessed to have that. I've posted at pointofview.net a Newsweek article that Mike Berry wrote, "Don't Let Pentagon Elites Drive Religious Out of the Military." It's an opinion piece by Mike, and Mike, under the Trump administration, you had these executive orders, directives, guidances coming out that, he just kept on doing the right thing with regard to religious liberty in the military. So does any of that still stand during the Biden administration, or is some of that gone?
Yeah, well, at least for now, a lot of the regulations and directives are still in place. That doesn't necessarily mean there aren't attempts underway to try to get those rewritten or rescinded or removed. So that's an issue that, that's a topic that I'm definitely keeping my eye very closely on. The problem is, as former President Obama famously said, when it comes to, executive agency directives and actions, all it takes is the stroke of a pen to change them. So these are not laws that were passed by Congress that would therefore require an act of Congress to undo. these are things that, President Biden can simply say, change it. And the Pentagon, as we know, when the president says jump, the Pentagon says how high.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but the other side of this is with the role and really the mandate from God for First Liberty Institute, whoever is in the White House, whoever controls Congress or the Senate, there's still the ability to fight and win battles over religious liberty, correct?
Absolutely. Just because a president or because someone in the Pentagon changes a rule or a regulation that makes it worse for religious liberty, that doesn't mean that we're without a place for recourse or ability to fight back. We've got fantastic judges, thanks largely in part to President Trump, for 4 years of nominating and for the Senate confirming a lot of judges who are true, constitutionalist, originalist judges, and we still have our service members who themselves, despite what we see in the headlines, despite how the media tries to mislead us to make us think that our military is completely a lost cause, I still have a lot of buddies who serve in the military, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, the vast majority of people serving in uniform love this country. They love our Constitution. They want to do the right thing. They just need someone like First Liberty to come alongside them and to say, if you're willing to stand, we will fight for you and we will fight with you.
Mike, I know that during this year under the Biden administration, the House Armed Services Committee had a hearing about extremism. They do these once in a while, extremism in the armed forces. And you testified there. And, it's concerning because it sort of depends on how you define extremism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the first thing is, if we want to talk about extremism in the armed forces, and this big push to eradicate or remove extremists, my response is, nobody wants to see true extremists gone from the military more than those of us who serve, because we believe that there is integrity and honor in serving this nation, but in serving and doing it the right way. And if somebody is a true extremist, then they need to be removed. But the real problem is, people will then say, what do you mean by extremist? Right. And so you can't defeat what you can't define. And thus far, the Department of Defense has been unable and incapable of defining what it means by extremists. And we've seen several instances now, where military officials have began to cast a really wide net and to label good people like evangelical Christians and Catholics. I mean, by name, they're saying evangelical Christians and Catholics might be extremists. And they're including them along with groups like Hamas and Al-Qaeda and the KKK. And you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, we actually have documented evidence of this. This is evidence. These are materials that are produced by the Department of Defense that say that evangelical Christians, Catholics, people who believe in individual liberties, people who believe in states' rights, that those are extremists. And so that was the warning, the caution that I gave to the House Armed Services Committee is you have to get it right when it comes to defining what an extremist is. Otherwise, you're going to start improperly, even if unintentionally, you're going to start improperly labeling good American citizens as extremists. And that is just leading down a dark path that we do not need to be going down as a country.
Folks, if you want to read more of the comments and just Mike Berry's take on this, you can go read that Newsweek article at pointofview.net. You can click through and get that. Mike, tell people how they can access the live stream tomorrow in about 10 seconds.
Go to firstliberty.org, and there should be a pop-up to access it. It's and the event's called First Liberty Live.
Okay, great. And you'll see Mike's picture. You'll be able to do it easily. I recommend you do so. Mike, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, give us a call during the next segment, 800-351-1212.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Critical race theory is coming to a school district near you. First, it was being promoted through a bill in Congress. Now it looks like it will be funded through President Biden's Department of Education. Critical race theory actually rests upon a Marxist foundation, but has a significant difference. Karl Marx focused on class conflict between capitalists and workers. This newer form of Marxism substituted race for class and sought a coalition of the dispossessed based upon racial and ethnic categories. Stanley Kurtz has been warning that the Civics Secures Democracy Act would be used by activists and educators to promote critical race theory. Now the Department of Education proposed a regulation that directs grant money to prioritize applications that support the development of culturally responsive teaching and learning. And I might mention that phrases like equity and culturally responsive are key buzzwords for critical race theory. Christopher Rufo has been documenting how critical race theory is already arriving in the schools. A California elementary school forced first graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. A middle school in Missouri forced teachers to locate themselves on an oppression matrix based upon the idea that white Christian males were members of an oppressor class. Although he is just one investigative journalist, he has already put together a database of more than 1,000 stories already. You know, last year, President Trump issued an executive order banning critical race theory training in the federal government. President Biden rescinded that order on his first day and now appears to be promoting it in schools across the country. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We are taking your calls at 800-351-1212. We've gone very swiftly through three fabulous guests and haven't taken any calls. So I want to open this segment up if you would like to comment on any of the topics we have discussed. One was, of course, American Heritage Girls, which is now the very successful alternative to the Girl Scouts. And if you have a comment on that, you can give us a call. Also, home, the importance of the homemaker, the importance of children, and just intentionally concentrating on their nurture and giving them a sense of importance and how important they are and what does that take. And, there's just so much with the theology of the home. And we have a book on our website at pointofview.net that can really open that up. It's just a beautiful book. And then, of course, the military. It's Military Appreciation Month. So many of you who listen have served, and we thank you. And perhaps you have family members that have. But since First Liberty Institute, which is just one of our, let's just say we think it's a culturally just absolutely necessary national treasure organization defending religious liberty. And one of the ways is in the military. If you've seen violations of religious liberty, difficulties in practicing religion or living out your faith in the military, you can give us a call about that. And I do want to kind of unpack that a little bit because we talked about how the Trump administration actually issued orders that gave further protections for the practice of religion, religious liberty in the military. And President Biden has really not rescinded those, but we see a little bit of that popping up and bubbling up. And one thing we have seen is efforts to teach critical race theory, identity politics, and just this wokeness that's infiltrating so many of our institutions, including public schools, also going into the military. And it has to be, as we are trying to expose it and others are trying to expose this in societal institutions, it has to be exposed and stood against in the military. And so I didn't get to post this, but the Daily Signal has written about this, especially in the month of March. They wrote a couple of pieces about this effort to really promote some sort of radical resources. And it was kind of in the name of what Mike Berry talked about, killing extremism in the ranks of the military. And the military really is not exempt from these efforts to impose critical race theory training. And so, we have to keep our eyes out for them. Certain committees in the military have already been sort of looking at some of these authors that really want us to be, it becomes another form of racism. Instead of a racism against the minorities, it's a racism against white people. And you don't need all this division in the U.S. military. And that's one thing that Mike Berry discusses in his Newsweek article, is that it's important to have cohesion and unity in the military. And these attempts to divide us by race just make it harder for the military to actually form the cohesion and the camaraderie and all of that that's important for our fighting forces to do their job effectively. And so this is probably the worst recipe for making the military better, would be critical race theory or just this kind of woke agenda. And so, it's important. And if you want to go to the Daily Signal, there's a couple of pieces. I didn't post them, but one of them was on April 6th by Fred Lucas. Pentagon promotes radical resources to kill, quote, extremism in the ranks. But there's another one. Identity politics and critical race theory have no place in the military. And this talks about one of our U.S. Senators, Tom Cotton, who was angry when he began to see this indoctrination of U.S. military personnel in critical race theory. He actually introduced a bill that would forbid it. And he's also sending his correspondence and speaking with admirals and the military brass, just expressing disapproval of the Navy. One of them is the Navy's decision to include books on critical race theory and other aspects of identity politics on professional reading lists. Now, Tom Cotton, he's a Republican senator from Arkansas. He also served, and he says that this is not the vision of Martin Luther King, who talked about a day when people, quote, will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This is quite the opposite. This is judging people by the color of their skin, privileging certain ones, and causing others to be seen as oppressors and needing to either make up for what has been done in the past or to apologize or debase themselves in some other way. And so, Martin Luther King, and this comes from the piece by Dakota Wood in the Daily Signal, like so many before and since who have championed a unified people within our great American experiment, he worked to replace identity by race, ethnic group, and economic status, and gender, religion, and all those things. If you're focusing on those, the things that divide us, then you are not focusing on the shared humanity that prizes mutual recognition and respect, regardless of various characteristics that tend to segregate people by race. I mean, we appreciate all the differences, and they add to a rich culture. But when we start dividing ourselves and sort of buying into this idea that our country is basically actually founded on mistreatment of a certain race, then, we start to actually lie. It's really a lie about what our country really is and what our founding documents really do. And so it's just it's something that we're having to deal with. I'm going to be in here on Friday with Kelly Shackelford and Jeremy Dyson. One of the things we're going to talk about, and this has to do with this whole effort in the schools to do this, teach this divisive theory of critical race theory, CRT. Here in Dallas, Texas, just not far from where I sit in the studio, there's been a couple of year effort to get that type of thing into the schools in a place called Carroll or South Lake Carroll. And it caused such a ruckus among parents that a young attorney named Hannah Smith ran for the school board, as did a couple of other people who objected to these efforts, and they won in the elections that just took place this past Saturday. So the school board now is populated by people who are standing against critical race theory. Some of the city council seats were also taken by such people. So there's a pushback against this divisive type of politics and just type of movement that's infiltrating our institutions. So Hannah Smith will join us. Kelly and Jeremy Dyson and I will be able to ask her questions. And I think it's a great example for how we can push back against this. It's also being discussed in state legislatures across the nation, even as we see President Biden mandating through the Department of Education that critical race theory be taught in K through 12 schools across the country. So it's a pitched battle, and it's something that I know that Kirby in his commentary today discussed how that plays itself out in education, and also that he discusses often on the show. This Daily Signal piece says critical race theory would move the military in the wrong direction by undoing decades and even centuries of work to foster a team-centered culture. And, that's really the bottom line in the military. Tom Cotton and also another congressman, Jim Banks of Indiana, and also Doug Lamborn of Colorado and Vicky Hartzler of Missouri, have all been questioning senior leaders in our military about this. So there's a battle taking place there. But Mike Berry said in his Newsweek article, and I'll just end the segment with this as we move toward our interview with Elaine Donnelly from the Center for Military Readiness. But Mike says, in recent years, mainstream religious belief or political persuasion have become collateral damage in the war on extremism. And this is really part and parcel of this divisive, woke ideology of identity politics and critical race theory. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to read Mike's article, pointofview.net, you can click on that. Also, you can go to First Liberty Institute, find out how to access the live stream tomorrow, which I know you will enjoy. And just check out the donate button there. It's there for your use, your generous use. Elaine Donnelly will join me right after this. Stick with us for more Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View, ladies and gentlemen. You know, issues bubble up regarding the U.S. military that sometimes we don't hear about, but they could affect all of us in a big way. And, the chief impediment to requiring women to register for the draft, which has always been the case, has been their ability to perform well in combat positions, or their inability. In 1981, the U.S. Supreme Court actually upheld the mandate that came from Congress that draft registration be limited to men. Now that decision is being challenged by an organization called the National Coalition for Men. A federal district court in Texas actually ruled in favor of that organization, but the Court of Appeals at the Fifth Circuit overturned that ruling last year. Hopefully the Supreme Court's going to decline to actually, it was in 2019, I believe, that happened. The Supreme Court has to decide now if they'll take it and review the Fifth Circuit's decision. With me to discuss this is Elaine Donnelly. She has been a frequent guest over the years on Point of View. She's founder and president of the Center for Military Readiness, and CMR has advocated since its founding for high, uncompromised standards in all forms of military training and sound priorities in the making of military social policies. She's really a well-respected voice. And Elaine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's good to talk with you again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, and I really wanted to talk to you about this issue because I don't think this is in the news, and yet it's very important.
Going to be.
It's going to be. So when are we going to get the Supreme Court's answer as to whether they will review this?
It should be by the middle of this month. We don't know for sure. Your background was well stated in introducing this topic. The courts have been looking at this issue now for a couple of years. Actually, even in litigation before this current cycle, several times the Supreme Court has agreed with that 1981 decision. It's called Roster versus Goldberg, saying that Congress had the right to set the rules for selective service registration. It is, as you said, all male. Young women are not included in registration, and there are a variety of reasons for this. And among them are whether or not it would make sense to try to mobilize equal numbers of men and women, knowing that the majority of women are not qualified for combat duties, which is what would be needed if indeed there was a need to reinstate the draft at all. So let's, starting from the beginning again, the lower court ruled in favor of a men's rights group. They're trying to get women involved in registration. Then the government at the level of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, wait a minute, not so fast. This is a congressional decision to make under the United States Constitution. The Fifth Circuit Court agreed this is not an appropriate issue for the courts to decide, but the petitioners took it to the Supreme Court. This was earlier this year. Now, my organization and a few other organizations and some distinguished military leaders filed an amicus brief. And our amicus brief, which was filed on March 12th, this is ongoing news here, it asked the court, the Supreme Court of the United States, to say, no, this is not ripe to be heard by the courts. Congress is considering legislation to include women in registration for the draft right now. In fact, they had a hearing on March 11th, the day before we filed our brief. And CMR, my organization, filed a statement in that hearing for the Senate Armed Services Committee opposing it. And this is how the decision should be made. Citizens and groups like ours should be able to go to Congress and say, we either like this idea or we don't. It should not be decided by the courts. Now, I'll skip all the paperwork back and forth, the replies and the briefs and all of the cycle that goes into litigation. But the court will decide whether to take up the case probably by mid-May. We don't know exactly, but I believe it is scheduled for them to at least look at it at one of their conferences. Usually it takes place on a Thursday or a Friday.
Elaine, what's your take on So, I mean, obviously, we all think that Congress should be deciding military policy, and you have, in many issues, women in the military, don't ask, don't tell, transgender policy. You've always said that Congress should be deciding these things.
Right.
But what do you think Congress would do about this? I mean, I cannot imagine that would be a popular idea among the Americans.
It's not. Congress has had many attempts and many requests to include women in registration for selective service. They have declined to do so. It is not a popular idea. But in 2016, they set up a commission, a rather well-funded one. It took 3 years to look at this issue. It was called the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service. It came out with recommendations last year. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. And they did recommend that women be included in selective service, among other things. It's a rather comprehensive report. But they did not do their homework on an issue that only the CMR amicus brief brought up. I'm so glad that we did make the effort to get our arguments before the Supreme Court, because although the Department of Justice agreed with CMR on the key point that Congress should decide, not the courts, the Department of Justice under Joe Biden did not address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is the question of whether men and women are interchangeable in the combat arms. Now, we presented only briefly in the statement that we filed with the Supreme Court a very brief but comprehensive summary of findings done by the United States Marine Corps in a 3-year study comparing the performance levels of mixed-gender units as compared to all male units in the combat arms. And what that study found out was that the mixed-gender units performing simulated combat tasks, this was in the desert, it went on for 9 months, in 69% of the tasks, the mixed-gender units did not do as well as the all-male units did. There were lots of other little facts that were summarized by the University of Pittsburgh, the professional researchers who looked at the data. We put that before the Supreme Court. Now, if we had not done that, they would not really be exposed to that argument. But I think even without that, the most compelling argument, the Department of Justice had to agree with us that this is not an issue for the courts to decide. Congress should decide it. Now, what would Congress do? Well, the first thing they ought to do is have hearings on the findings of the Marine Corps study. That was done from, 2013 to 2015. The Senate didn't have comprehensive hearings at that time. They haven't had hearings on the issue of whether girls draft our daughters should be legislation that should be passed. Congress needs to step up and take a serious look at this.
I would think so.
So far, they haven't done that. Yeah, they haven't done it yet. But, if a number of people say, wait a minute, you need to look at this issue and take it seriously, I do feel that Congress would not take this road to so-called equality. As we know, women can join the military right now. All positions are open to them. Some of them ought to be reconsidered because it hasn't been working out very well for reasons I can explain if there's time.
Yes, I do want to.
So if Congress looks at this and said, well, wait a minute, if we call up 50% men and 50% women in a catastrophic national emergency, what does that do to selective service? Well, it breaks the system, for one thing, because you'd have to bring in thousands of young women to find only the very tiny few who might be capable of serving in the combat arms. And by the way, we're not talking about drafting to be in the Marine Corps band or support positions. We already have an all-volunteer force, and many of these roles are already covered or would be. Anyone who says women would not step up to serve their country in time of war, I think they are really selling short the commitment of women that we historically have seen many, many times. So there's no need to take the selective service system and gum it all up with egalitarian goals that really have nothing to do with winning or deterring a war in a national emergency that is so catastrophic. It's beyond the capability of the all-volunteer force.
We will take your calls, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a question for Elaine Donnelly in the next segment, 800-351-1212. I just have to throw in here before the break that before 2013, when I would talk to Elaine Donnelly, we would talk about how, well, they're not going to draft women because women are not allowed in combat. But that all changed. As a matter of fact, in 2015, the Obama administration opened all the military's ground combat arms to women. And the then Defense Secretary was Ash Carter. He told National Review that women could serve in the Army and Marine Corps infantry units as long as they qualify and meet the standards. And so after the break, I'm going to ask Elaine Donnelly about the standards. Supposedly, they're not supposed to dumb down the standards in order to allow women in combat. That would be crazy. So we'll talk about whether or not that is going on. Stay with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest is Elaine Donnelly, founder and president for the Center for Military Readiness. And Elaine, earlier in the program, we had Mike Berry from First Liberty Institute, and we were talking about the fact that May is it's the Military Appreciation Month. And, you know, we can give a lot of kudos to those who have served and certainly talk about the attributes of the military. But if we appreciate the military, we need to do what you do, and that is protect those who serve so they can serve best. And so this whole agenda for placing women in combat and drafting women does not do that, does it?
No, it doesn't, and thank you for saying that. We do have civilian control of the military. That means that civilians need to oversee what Congress does or doesn't do on these issues that affect military life. We have an administration now that is not hesitating to impose on our military burdens, social burdens, that will make life more difficult and more dangerous. This would be just one more loaded on some problems that the military is facing right now and would become worse if Congress should go along with recommendations to include women in selective service registration. But I do want to return to this idea, as was said by the previous administration, Ashton Carter, the Secretary of Defense, well, as long as women meet standards, then this is okay. Well, people assumed that standards would be gender neutral, the same as men. In fact, that promise was indeed made, gender neutral standards. So the Army set out to change their basic fitness test. What used to be a physical fitness test became the Army combat fitness test. Combat being, I should stress that word, because it's supposed to be, it's a tougher test, but what they're finding is that women were failing in the initial round 84% of the time. So, well, that wasn't acceptable, so they made some changes in the test. They substituted some tests that were less strenuous than the leg lift up to a bar. That's pretty tough to do. Instead, you can do some other things instead, but the failure rate is still very high. Now we're getting to ACFT 3.0, and they're saying, well, we'll do everything blind. The promotion officials won't even know whose records they're looking at. No names, no identifiers, no pronouns, and we will stack up the women's records against other women and the men's records against other men, and then the top percentile, they're the ones who get promoted. Well, there's a lot of problems with this because the top-rated female, according to all sorts of objective tests, usually comes in at the lowest rated level of the men when we're talking about physical tests. Okay, not intellectual or courage or anything like that. This is widely known. So the idea of using percentile ratings instead of actual test scores, it's just a way to get around this idea of gender-neutral standards, which are not working. So this is one of the points that I made in my testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee when they had this hearing on March 11. And in the court hearing, of course, we cited the Marine Corps study that documented in excruciating detail the fact that should be obvious. Men and women are not the same. They are not similarly situated. That's the legal term that was stated by Roster versus Goldberg back in 1981. Nothing has changed. Men and women still are physically different, and even the most physically strong woman is still at the lower level of men. Now, you may have a few, but because some few women are doing very well, we even had some women pass in Ranger training. Well, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that women as a group and as a full cohort of 50% of the population, that they should be called up in equal numbers for selective service registration. It just doesn't follow. So, as you said earlier, we stand for sound principles in military policies, high uncompromised standards. It would not be right to lower standards to accommodate women because they are physically different than men. That is something that is due to biology. It is not prejudice, and it's not a stereotype. It's very real. And in a time of war, in actual combat, those physical differences really do matter a lot.
It's common sense and it matters. Let's take a call. Let's go to Alex in Georgia, listening in on WLPE. Alex, thanks for calling in.
Thank you, Mrs. Penna Dexter. I appreciate it. So this whole administration has got everything twisted. I'm going to try to keep this to one topic.
You know what? We need a question. Just a question.
Sure. Okay. What are we going to do with everybody who doesn't claim men or women as a gender? Are they going to force them to join the selective service? Or if I want to choose to be transgender, could I dodge the draft if I want to be transgender?
Okay. Well, wow, a lot of questions there. But Elaine, I guess, what that does bring up is the transgender issue in the military. I would love to have you, we just have 3 minutes before the end of the program. But if you could just just weigh in on this, because you've weighed in so well on many of these social pushes in the military, and now we have another one.
Yeah, that's a whole issue in itself. And the military is being ordered to deny biological realities. The fact that men are men, women are women, it's determined by biology. There's no such thing as assigning gender at birth or sex at birth. It's there before birth, and it's there because of human DNA. That's not going to change. But what this administration wants to do is return to the policies in place under Barack Obama, forcing doctors and nurses to pretend that gender doesn't matter, that sex doesn't matter, forcing them in some cases to go against their own conscience, medical ethics, force young women to accept biological males in their private facilities and their athletic teams. These are all issues. They're going on in the civilian world as well, but they're even worse in the military, because you can't get away from these issues by just changing jobs. Once you sign up, you live with whoever it is you're assigned to live with, and you have to follow orders. So the Trump administration did change that policy. They didn't revoke it entirely. The policy was a nuanced one. It was on its way to being upheld as constitutional by the Supreme Court. I think it would have been. But now this administration, they won't defend the Trump policy before the Supreme Court. It will take a new president and perhaps legislation to restore some common sense with regard to biology and sex in the military.
Yeah. Meanwhile, because the one thing the Trump policy did was it said people could serve if they were sort of settled in their gender, whatever that was. But
right. The issue was gender dysphoria, a psychological condition that affects one's perception of their gender identity. If they have had treatment, if they are seeking surgery, things like that, then the Trump administration, the policy, they were not eligible to serve in the military. But if 36 months had passed, 3 years, a person is considered stable in the identity that they had chosen, then they could still serve. But gender dysphoria would not be part of that issue.
You don't want, you're pulling a lot of problems in when you try to bring people that are confused.
In other words, transgenders were not barred from the military as a class, contrary to that charge always being made. Again, it was a nuanced policy, very carefully thought through, and it was built on some pretty good evidence. And again, I think it would have been upheld as constitutional, and eventually will be if it ever gets reinstated.
Well, Elaine, thank you so much for clarifying so many things for us today. Really appreciate it. And we hope that you'll be back much sooner this next time.
Sure. Just let me know. I'll be glad to be on anytime.
That's Elaine Donnelly, Center for Military Readiness. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow, I believe, is a Millennial Roundtable, and Chelsea will be hosting, and she'll have some great topics and guests. Friday, Kelly and also Jeremy Dyes and I will be doing the weekend edition. We look forward to having you join us on that program. We love doing it, and we will welcome your calls on Friday. Have a great evening.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.